You're watching JCT TV. This is Bible study for the 21st century. Welcome, friends. Jim Cantelon here. We are in the book of Luke, and we will be here for some time to come. If my past track record is anything to count on, I take my time. But I think the scriptures are so valuable and so important, we should take time with them. Anyway, we're going to be looking at some added dimensions to Jesus' miracles as Luke describes them, and they are absolutely fascinating. We'll be starting out with something related to a Roman centurion. Back with more right after this. Before we get started, friends, I just wanted to apologize to those of you, I think, in the Canadian viewing audience who saw some disruption to our programming last month related to our network having been hacked. And this really upset the whole system. And so some of the programming you saw was repeats. It was out of order. But they have resolved all of these issues. And again, our apologies. But we are back in the new year, I think, cooking with gas, as they say. All right, we are in Luke chapter 7. Let's take a look at the first 17 verses of that chapter. When Jesus had finished saying all this to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. There, a centurion servant, whom his master valued highly, was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, "This man deserves to have you do this because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." So Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, don't trouble yourself. I don't deserve to have you come under my roof. That's why I do not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, he goes. That one, come, he comes. I say to my servant, do this, he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd following him, he said, "I tell you, I have not found such great faith, even in Israel." Then the man who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well. Okay, let's stop there, and then we'll pick up another remarkable miracle that follows that in Luke. Jesus had been ministering in the areas around Capernaum. But as we pointed out in former programming, Capernaum was his adopted home base. He probably boarded with Peter's household. His mother-in-law had a house right there on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. And I was just there a few weeks ago, and the ruins of that house are still extant, but kind of a chapel has been built over it, but you can still see the original foundation stones. Anyway, Capernaum was at the center of much of the commerce, if not all of the commerce, of the Galilee. It was really a trade city, and all kinds of various caravans, with all kinds of goods were coming through Capernaum, and Capernaum took advantage of that and taxed these caravans. And so Capernaum was doing very, very well. It was also a fishing center and a very active place, but it was highly Gentilized. In fact, the Upper Galilee was called the Galilee of the Gentiles, and Capernaum was sort of the epicenter of that cultural and ethnic reality. Anyhow, Jesus returns to Capernaum, and he's approached by a delegation of Jewish elders with a request from a local Roman centurion. Now, the Roman centurion would have great authority in Capernaum. All of Judah and Israel were under Roman authority. The Romans were quite reasonable, by the way. They were not nasty to the people they had vanquished. They respected the religion. They respected the culture. They did everything they could to kind of help these vanquished people have a normal life. Nevertheless, this centurion would be, a key guy, a very, very important guy. So he sends a delegation to Jesus. Now, this was unusual in every sense, but the elders expressed their mission by saying he has a servant or a slave who he really values, who's really important. Jesus probably knew him, by the way, because Capernaum was a small area. And he's sick and he's dying. And he's wondering, if you would be able to come and heal him. And by this message, from the centurion to Jesus, he was really showing regard and respect for Jesus, which was much more than many of the Jewish people were doing at that time. So Jesus says, well, what's the deal? He says, just say the word, and his servant will be healed. He said, I'm under authority. I say the word, and my soldiers do it. My soldiers must do. My slaves do it. My slaves must do it, all under my authority. Similar to you have authority. You just say the word, and my guy will be healed. Well, Jesus responded to this with great faith, as he called it, such great faith. In fact, he says, you know what? I haven't seen faith like this even in the house of Israel, which of course was ethnically offensive. And many of the religious Jews who were always looking for a way to trip Jesus up would, respond to this. But Jesus was no respecter of persons. Whether you're a Gentile, whether you're a Jew, whatever the case, white, black, whatever, he just responded to faith. So the guy is healed. It's a great story. Let's pick it up following that. Verse 10. Verse 11. Soon afterwards, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. As he approached the town, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother. She was a widow, and a large crowd from the town was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." Then he went up and touched the bier they were carrying him on, and the bearers stood still. He said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. They were all filled with awe and praised God. "A great prophet has appeared among us," they said. "God has come to help his people." And this news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country. Jesus and his disciples may have overnighted at the foot of Mount Tabor. It's sort of halfway between Capernaum and Nain. I just drove by there because I was in Israel just last month. Mount Tabor is a very impressive mountain. Many Christian commentators over the centuries have seen it as the Mount of Transfiguration. I don't see it that way. There's a much higher mountain at the northern border in Israel called Mount Hermon or Mount Hermon. And I really think that is the Mount of Transfiguration, but it's a moot point. But nevertheless, it's a very impressive minor mountain. And by minor, I mean, it's got to be, maybe 1,200, 1,500 feet above the Jezreel plain. So it really sticks up high. I've driven up to the height on a few occasions, and it's all switchbacks and a very scary drive, believe me, especially when you're coming down. But I wouldn't be surprised if Jesus and the disciples, because they were walking, maybe overnighted at the foot of Mount Tabor, and there was always a great crowd of followers accompanying Jesus and the 12. So, when Jesus walked around, it was almost like a small town moving around. As he encounters Nain, the outskirts of Nain, he sees this funeral procession that's coming out of the gates of the city. And it would appear that this widow, whose son has just died, was highly regarded because pretty much the whole town are there in the procession. And Jesus walks up to the funeral bier, B-I-E-R, and touches it. The pallbearers stopped, and Jesus says to the young man, "I say to you, arise." And the young guy sits up just like he's been having a rest and starts talking. Well, the crowd, as you would expect, were overwhelmed. One translation says with great fear. Another translation says with great awe. But nevertheless, you would be fearful and full of awe too, as would I, watching this thing happen. And they glorify God in wonder, proclaiming God has visited his people. They saw something here that was supranatural. They say a great prophet is among us, and that was about the highest accolade they could make at that point in time. They weren't theologians. They weren't necessarily eschatologically informed. They weren't really looking for a Messiah, per se, but a great prophet. But in calling him a great prophet, they were essentially giving him similar stature to some of Israel's mighty men of God who had raised the dead, like Elijah and Elisha. So they're full of amazement, and immediately the word spreads, not just through Nain, but to surrounding villages along the Jezreel Valley, probably all the way back to Nazareth and then down to Capernaum. I mean, that whole area is very small. But a great miracle worker was among the people. And his miracle working was multidimensional, doing everything from changing water to wine, to raising the dead, to healing lepers, to opening blind eyes, healing those who were lame, the halt, the lame, and the blind. Jesus, this was in the early stages of his ministry, but he was really making an impact. Speaking of impact, Jesus still makes an impact today. And he doesn't do it the way he did it then when he was on the earth in person, but he's doing it powerfully around the world by his Spirit, his Holy Spirit, and all kinds of millions of people testifying to the impact of Jesus on their lives, on their communities, and sometimes even on their nations to this very day. So Jesus is something else. And it's just going to get even more and more impressive as we continue throughout this gospel. I'll be back right after this. So what follows next, I think in every sense, is a cautionary tale. It's an illustration of how a political/religious agenda can eclipse a powerful revelation from heaven itself. And you'll see as we read it, and then I will comment, of course. Beginning with verse 18 of Luke chapter 7. John's disciples told him about all these things. calling two of them. This is John the Baptist, by the way, John's disciples. He sent them to the Lord to ask, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?" When the men came to Jesus, they said, "John the Baptist sent us to you to ask, 'Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?'" At that very time, Jesus cured many who had diseases, sicknesses, evil spirits, gave sight to many who were blind. So he replied to the messengers, "Go back and report to John what you've seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me." After John's messengers left, Jesus began to speak to the crowd about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed swayed by the wind? If not, what did you go out to see? A man dressed in fine clothes? No. Those who wear expensive clothes and indulge in luxury are in palaces. But what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it's written, 'I will send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you.' I tell you, among those born of women, there is no one greater than John, yet the one who is least in the kingdom of God is greater than he." All the people, even the tax collectors, when they heard Jesus' words, acknowledged that God's way was right, because they'd been baptized by John. But the Pharisees and the experts in the law rejected God's purpose for themselves because they had not been baptized by John. Jesus went on to say, "To what then can I compare the people of this generation? What are they like? They're like children sitting in the marketplace, calling out to each other, 'We played the pipe for you and you didn't dance. We sang a dirge and you didn't cry.' For John the Baptist came neither eating bread nor drinking wine, and you say he's a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and you say he's a glutton, a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is proved right by all her children." Whoa. Now, Luke's narrative of John's baptizing Jesus, we read about that several weeks ago in Luke chapter 3. It's very brief, but it's profound. The profundity lies in the report that, quote, "Heaven was opened and the Holy Spirit descended," unquote, on Jesus, quote, "in bodily form like a dove, and a voice came from heaven. 'You are my Son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased,' unquote." Now, this was classic theophany, and with respectful regard to those who interpret otherwise, what if John saw both the dove and heard the voice of God, as well as Jesus heard it? Bodily form and voice seem to imply an audience. If indeed John bore witness to it, then it helps explain the later conundrum that came upon him and his sending his disciples for a kind of a check. Did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? Because John the Baptist, like all of those who were very focused on the end time, he expected a warrior Messiah. Someone who would come in and rout the Romans and establish a kingdom. It's likely that he interpreted the dove and the voice as confirmation that this warrior king or this warrior Messiah had come. And like his Essene counterparts, E-S-S-E-N-E, you can Google that, E-S-S-E-N-E, John believed that the day of the Lord was about to dawn. And so his baptisms of repentance were intentionally designed to prepare a purified people for that event. The king was at the door. So, very soon, a throne would be established in Jerusalem. The Roman occupiers would be routed, and Messiah would rule the world. But John's disciples' report of Jesus' ministry disturbed him. In fact, he began to think he'd got it wrong. And that's why he sent this loaded question to Jesus. Are you the guy or are you not? Are you he who is to come, or are we to look for another? The glorious theophany at the Jordan had been cast into a kind of dark shadow of eschatological doubt and disappointment, because Jesus was not performing the way John or any of the other keen eschatological end-of-timers were expecting. Well, how did Jesus respond to John? He's basically saying to John, your concept of Messiah is skewed. It's distorted. It's not right. he sends John's messengers back with a veiled rebuke. And in this rebuke, he's referencing Isaiah's words in Isaiah chapter 35, where he gives a list of some of the things that would happen under Messiah's ministry. But to this list of messianic qualifications, in Isaiah 35, Jesus adds, lepers are cleansed, the dead are raised up. And then he added a personal tone of his own disappointment. Blessed is he who takes no offense at me. That's a direct rebuke to John, because they were cousins after all. And I think Jesus expected more of his friend. I mean, John had expectations of Jesus. Jesus had expectations of John. So Jesus then turned from speaking to these messengers from John the Baptist, his cousin, and he has a discussion with the 12 and the public who have gathered around. He raises his voice above the crowd noise and begins to praise John, the wilderness prophet, who at that point had a larger and longer ministry track record than Jesus did. John was not a politically correct servant of the status quo. He was not easily swayed. He was not self-serving. Rather, he was a prophet of the Elisha school, a kind of fist-in-the-jaw sort of preacher, and in many ways, the greatest spokesman of all time. He was the forerunner, after all, of the coming Messiah. And he was the one who was inaugurating, if you will, the coming of the kingdom of heaven, an era that would culminate ultimately in the day of the Lord, this huge end-of-time day of the Lord. And as such, he was the personification of Malachi's prophecy, quote, I will send my messenger who will prepare the way before me, unquote. That's Malachi 3:1. So John marked a tipping point in the history of God's dealings with mankind. And as such, he represented the last of the great biblical prophets, even as he announced a new era of grace. And so, even as the greatest of the past, he was least in terms of God's voice in the present. It would not be John, but Jesus, who would declare, he who has seen me has seen the Father. Nevertheless, Jesus, God incarnate, humbly saw himself as a servant, ready to obediently die, that humankind could be saved from the Father's wrath at sin. But it was John who prepared the way of the cross. Okay. Jesus then caps off his defense of himself to John with a scathing rebuke of the religious establishment. He compares these unbelievers to children playing make-believe with the game of weddings and funerals. They played weddings with music and dancing, but John wouldn't sing or dance. Therefore, he must be a demoniac, okay? Then they played funerals with weeping and wailing, but Jesus wouldn't mourn. Therefore, he was a carouser, a party animal. Well, these were foolish children. The children of wisdom were the Am Haaretz, the people of the land, the everyday people, the tax collectors, the sinners. They were new wineskins whose lives would expand with the transforming new wine of grace. And there's also a bit of a lesson here for us in the present tense. For all of his legitimacy and his power and his might, the greatest of all the Old Testament prophets, John the Baptist had a hard time yielding to the new beginning that he was forerunner of. He had expectations that were rooted in the past. Jesus, in the present tense and representing future tense, was a totally different creation in terms of the people. They'd never seen someone quite like this before. With all of this power, all of this charismatic presence, his ability to preach, his ability to heal, his ability to impress people, his courage, his forthrightness, his presence, so powerful in every way. But he represented something that he himself described as the kingdom of heaven is among you, referring to himself. He was the personification of the kingdom of heaven. He was the new bread from heaven, if you will. And sometimes, friends, we encounter new bread and we don't like it. It doesn't taste the way the old bread tasted. We'd rather have the old than the new. Cautionary tale. If it's bread from the Spirit, then by all means, do not resist it, because the Lord may be introducing you to a whole new era, a whole new chapter in your life and even your family history. And it takes some courage to take the leap and to embrace it. I'll be back right after this. This is one of our special patients with Somebody Cares in Malawi. And she's in great need of care. And our ministry in Malawi, Somebody Cares, knows how to care for people. And so we have been visiting with her, we've been praying with her. And as you may notice down beside her, this is a regular part of home-based care. There's fortified porridge called lakuni fala. It's fortified with vitamins and minerals. There's soap, there's cooking oil, there's some selenium, trace mineral, which boosts the immune system and is so gratefully received here, and other products that just kind of help ease the burden a bit. But she would be an example of thousands that Somebody Cares has been caring for these past 22 years. And with WOW, we're just grateful that we can be a part of it. I mentioned a moment ago that I imagine that Jesus was a little bit hurt, if not just put off, by John's question, "Are you the guy?" John would be the last that he would expect to be asking that kind of question. But we'll discover, as we have in some of the other Gospels already, that even Jesus' own family were questioning Jesus' legitimacy and his integrity, his calling, his gifting. Because Jesus was not only Son of God, he was Son of Man. He had to sleep, he had to eat, he needed companionship in terms of social interaction. He was just as human as you are, as I am. And his feelings could be hurt, which is a little bit fascinating, but obviously that was the case. So let's not forget that Jesus is gentle and mild, and he relates to us because he understands what it is to be human.